Picture this. The sun beats down on a dusty plain somewhere in the ancient world. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, leather, and fear. Around you stand hundreds of warriors, their armor glinting, their eyes fixed on the enemy line across the field. These are the soldiers whose names would echo through history: the Spartans, the legionaries, the samurai. We know their legends, the epic tales of valor and victory. But what about the real people behind those stories? What was it actually like to live as an ancient warrior, to train from childhood, to carry the weight of your gear and your community's hopes into battle, to feel the mix of terror and determination as you advanced toward an opposing force just as determined as you were? So much of what we think we know about these fighters comes from Hollywood, from simplified textbooks, or from mythologized accounts written long after the fact. We imagine them as near superhuman figures, defined entirely by their moments of glory, but the truth is far richer, far more human, and in many ways far more compelling. These were not just faceless soldiers, they were individuals with fears, dreams, families, and personal reasons for picking up a sword or spear. They experienced boredom in camp, wrote letters home, struggled with blisters and hunger, and wondered whether they would live to see another season. Their daily realities, the food they ate, the friends they relied on, the rituals that grounded them, tell us as much about ancient life as any grand battle ever could. In this video, we're going to journey beyond the legends and meet the real warriors of history. We'll explore how Spartan boys endured a childhood of extreme discipline, how Roman legionaries built empires while dreaming of retirement, and how samurai balanced the way of the sword with the way of the brush. We'll uncover the training that forged them, the gear they depended on, and the motivations that drove them forward even when everything seemed lost. This isn't just a story of conquests and heroes. It's a story of human resilience, ingenuity, and the complex ties that bind soldiers across time and culture. So settle in and get ready to see these iconic figures in an entirely new light, as real people, facing real challenges and leaving a legacy that still shapes our world today. That iconic image of the Spartan warrior, immortalized in film and folklore, is both powerful and deeply misleading. While the physical prowess and crimson cloaks were real, the man beneath the helmet was far more complex than a mere killing machine. His entire life, from the moment he could walk, was a meticulously crafted journey toward becoming a single, vital component in history's most fearsome military machine. This process began not with a sword in hand, but with a brutal separation from everything soft and familiar. At the tender age of 7, Spartan boys were taken from their mothers and plunged into the Agoge, a state-controlled training regimen that was less a school and more a 13-year-long trial by fire. The goal was singular: to forge absolute loyalty to Sparta and an unwavering tolerance for pain, hunger, and hardship. Life within the Agoge was a relentless test of survival and cunning. Boys were deliberately underfed to encourage them to steal their own meals, but being caught meant severe punishment, not for the theft itself, but for the failure to execute it without detection. This taught resourcefulness, stealth, and a ruthless pragmatism. They slept on rough reed beds they had to gather themselves from the Eurotas River, and were subjected to violent physical contests and whippings that could turn fatal, all designed to weed out any perceived weakness. Yet it wasn't just about brutality. They were also taught to read, to write, and to sing in a fierce, rhythmic style meant to inspire unity and courage before battle. This combination of intellectual and physical conditioning was intended to create soldiers who were both disciplined and clever, capable of following orders but also of thinking strategically in the chaos of combat. A common misconception, heavily promoted by pop culture, is that these men lived their entire lives in military barracks, consumed only by war. In reality, after graduating the Agoge around age 20 and becoming a full citizen, or homoios meaning equal, a Spartan man's life diversified. While he was obligated to remain in the military until the age of 60, he was also expected to marry, manage a kleros, an allotted plot of land worked by the helot population, and participate in the political life of the state. He would dine not alone, but in a common mess hall with his 15-man military unit, the Sisisha, where contributions of food and wine were mandatory for membership. Failure to contribute could mean a loss of citizenship, proving that his social and political identity remained inextricably linked to his role as a provider and a soldier. This brings us to the heart of the Spartan legend, the Phalanx. This was not merely a formation, it was a physical manifestation of their entire philosophy. Each hoplite, gripping his large, round shield, the aspis, understood its true name, the hoplon. This shield was not for his protection alone. Its primary purpose was to protect the man to his left. To abandon your shield was the greatest dishonor, not because you lost personal armor, but because you had betrayed the brother standing next to you. The phalanx's immense strength came from this profound, non-negotiable interdependence. It was a wall of bronze, wood, and flesh that moved and breathed as one entity, where individual heroics were discouraged and collective discipline was everything. A single break in the line could spell doom for all, making every man utterly reliant on the courage and steadiness of his comrades. So when we strip away the Hollywood myth, what we find is not a band of invincible super soldiers, but a society of intensely disciplined individuals who sacrificed personal freedom for collective strength. They were farmers, politicians, and fathers who lived by a brutal code, not for glory in a film, but for the survival and dominance of their city-state. Their reality was a difficult, often short, life of duty that extended far beyond the battlefield, revealing a human story of sacrifice and community that is, in many ways, more compelling than any fiction. While the Spartan system demanded a lifetime of devotion to the state, the Roman legionary represented a different kind of soldier, one who served the empire not just out of duty, but for a very tangible personal reward. That iconic image of identical soldiers moving in perfect lockstep is powerful, but it hides the individual ambitions that powered the entire machine. For a young man from a conquered province or a poor Roman family, signing that 25-year enlistment paper was a life-changing decision. It was a grueling commitment, but it offered a path to wealth, status, and most importantly, Roman citizenship, a prize that could elevate an entire family for generations. This promise of a better future was the engine that drove recruitment across the vast expanse of the empire, creating a military force drawn from diverse cultures, yet unified under the Roman eagle. The transformation from raw recruit to hardened legionary was achieved through what might be history's most grueling and effective training regimen. Imagine marching 20 miles in a single day, not on a pleasant hike, but under the weight of a 60-pound pack, wearing full armor and carrying your weapons, all while being expected to arrive at your destination ready to build a fully fortified camp with ditches and palisade walls before you could even rest. This wasn't an occasional drill, it was standard procedure designed to build not just muscle, but immense mental fortitude and unit cohesion. Weapons training was equally relentless. Recruits practiced with wooden swords and wicker shields that were twice the weight of the real things, building the strength and muscle memory to wield their gladius with deadly efficiency. They learned to thrust, not slash, aiming for the gut of a practice post, turning each soldier into a master of close-quarters combat where efficiency meant survival. And that equipment they carried was a masterpiece of ancient military innovation. The legionary was a walking arsenal of specialized tools. His Lorica segmentata, that iconic banded iron armor, offered superior protection and flexibility compared to the chainmail of earlier eras. His primary weapons were a study in tactical brilliance. The pilum, a heavy javelin with a soft iron shank designed to bend upon impact, rendering an enemy's shield useless and often becoming a tangled, cumbersome obstacle, and the gladius, a short, double-edged sword perfect for the thrusting and stabbing motions used in tight formation. He also carried a dagger, a shovel, a saw, a basket for moving earth, 2 stakes for the camp's defensive wall, and several days' worth of rations. This heavy load earned them the nickname Marius's Mules, a testament to the logistical burden each man bore to keep the army self-sufficient. But to see the legionary only as a fighter is to miss half of his story. The Roman army was also the ancient world's largest and most advanced engineering and construction corps. When not campaigning, these soldiers built the infrastructure that held the empire together. They paved roads that stretched for thousands of miles, constructed bridges that defied rivers, erected aqueducts to channel water into growing cities, and built the forts and walled towns that secured Roman borders. A legion contained within its ranks not just infantrymen, but surveyors, carpenters, masons, and medical staff. This dual role as both conqueror and builder meant the legionary was as likely to have calluses from a shovel as from a sword grip, permanently altering the landscape of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Amidst the discipline and the dust of construction, we find the most humanizing aspects of their lives. Archaeological finds, particularly the preserved letters and documents from places like Vindolanda Fort on Hadrian's Wall, give us a whispered conversation with these men across the centuries. We read birthday party invitations, requests for more socks and beer, and soldiers writing home to their families, expressing the same worries and cares that any soldier would today. They complained about the food, groused about their officers, and sent money back home. Their daily routine involved meticulous maintenance of their costly gear, cooking in their 8-man tent groups called contubernium, and finding small moments of respite with games of dice. This blend of extreme discipline and utterly relatable humanity is the true secret to the legionary's success. He fought not just for an abstract idea of Rome, but for the very concrete dream of a farm of his own, a family safe and prosperous, and his name inscribed as a full citizen of the greatest empire the world had ever known. While the Roman legionary marched for citizenship and a plot of land, the samurai of feudal Japan served a different master, a complex code of honor that intertwined duty, art, and personal identity in a way unlike any other warrior tradition. The popular image of the silent, stoic swordsman is compelling, but it barely scratches the surface of a reality that was steeped in political maneuvering, artistic pursuit, and profound philosophical contradiction. Their story begins not on a battlefield, but in the provinces of Japan during the Heian period, around the 9th century. Originally hired as armed escorts and enforcers for wealthy nobles who were more interested in courtly poetry than warfare, these provincial warriors slowly amassed land and influence. Over centuries, they evolved from hired muscle into the shogunate, the military government that would become the true ruling power of Japan for nearly 700 years, relegating the emperor to a largely ceremonial role. The essence of the samurai's education was captured in the ideal of Bunbu Ryodo, the concept of mastering both the literary and martial arts. A young boy from a samurai family would indeed be trained relentlessly in swordsmanship, archery, and horsemanship. But his days were just as likely to be spent perfecting his calligraphy, composing poetry, or studying classical Chinese texts. This wasn't a hobby, it was a core part of his development into a leader. The belief was that a mind refined by art and learning would be better able to strategize, administer justice, and command respect. A samurai was expected to be as graceful wielding a brush as he was wielding a katana, finding a balance between the creative and the destructive that defined his role in society. This brings us to Bushido, the famous way of the warrior. While later periods would codify this into a strict, almost romanticized ethical system, the practical reality for a samurai living through Japan's violent Sengoku, or warring states, period was far more nuanced. Loyalty to one's lord was paramount, but so was survival and the advancement of one's own clan. This often led to heartbreaking choices and blatant betrayals that history remembers as strategic pragmatism. The infamous act of seppuku, or ritual suicide, was not just about atonement for failure. It was a calculated move to restore honor to one's family and avoid the disgrace of execution, thereby ensuring that their heirs could retain land and status. The code was a guiding star, but the turbulent political landscape often required navigating by a more complex map. Their equipment reflected this unique blend of artistry and function. A samurai's armor was a masterpiece of design, made from countless small lacquered iron or leather plates laced together with colorful silk cords. This construction offered remarkable mobility and ventilation, allowing for fluid movement unlike the rigid plate armor of European knights. The helmet, or kabuto, often featured a striking crest and a fearsome face guard to intimidate opponents and signify the wearer's identity. And then there was the katana. More than a simple weapon, it was considered the very soul of the samurai, an object of spiritual significance. The process of forging it was a sacred ritual, and the sword was often given a name and passed down through generations. It was a tool for killing, but also a symbol of the warrior's spirit and his social standing. To assume a samurai's life was consumed entirely by war is to miss his most enduring legacy. In times of peace, which could last for decades under the stable Tokugawa shogunate, these warriors had to adapt or become obsolete. Many transitioned into roles as administrators, bureaucrats, and diplomats, governing domains and managing the complex economy of feudal Japan. Others became dedicated patrons of the arts, fostering the development of tea ceremony, no theater, ink painting, and garden design cultural treasures that remain central to Japanese identity today. This ability to shift from the brutality of the battlefield to the refinement of the court demonstrates a fascinating versatility, proving that the true strength of the samurai lay not just in his skill with a sword, but in his adaptability and his deep connection to the cultural heart of his nation. Now let's set sail for the frozen north, where the very word Viking still echoes with a terrifying reputation. For centuries, the popular image has been one of brutal, horned helmeted raiders descending from dragon-headed ships to burn and plunder. But this dramatic picture is one of history's greatest oversimplifications. The reality of the Norse people was infinitely more complex and fascinating. The term Viking itself wasn't even a label for an entire people. It was a verb, an activity. To go a Viking meant to embark on an overseas expedition, a specific and often seasonal occupation. For the vast majority of the year, the very same man who might row a longship was, first and foremost, a farmer, a fisherman, a blacksmith, or a trader. His life was dictated by the harsh Scandinavian climate, working the thin soil, tending livestock, and preparing for the long, dark winters. Taking up arms was often a necessity, a way to supplement a difficult livelihood, protect the family, or seize an opportunity for a better life far from home. This practical approach to warfare meant Viking groups were remarkably diverse. While we often imagine a homogeneous band of blonde giants, a typical raiding or trading party was a mix of men from different Scandinavian regions, sometimes even including Slavic and Baltic warriors. Perhaps most surprisingly, growing archaeological evidence suggests that some of these warriors were women. The famous Birka grave in Sweden, once assumed to hold a high-ranking male commander, was confirmed through DNA analysis to be a woman, buried with a full array of weapons, armor, and 2 horses. Norse sagas themselves speak of shield maidens, women who chose the path of the warrior. This challenges the notion of Viking society as purely patriarchal in a martial context, revealing a more nuanced social structure where capability could sometimes trump gender norms. Their success was undeniably built upon their revolutionary maritime technology. The longship was a masterpiece of naval engineering, a vessel of breathtaking beauty and terrifying efficiency. Its shallow draft allowed it to navigate not just the open ocean but also the smallest rivers, enabling Vikings to strike deep inland with shocking speed, appearing as if from nowhere. They could cross the North Atlantic to Iceland, Greenland, and even the coast of North America, and then turn around and row up the Seine to besiege Paris. These ships were the key to their identity as raiders, traders, and explorers, all rolled into one. A warrior's equipment was equally practical. The infamous horned helmet is a complete myth, a Victorian invention. Real helmets were simple, conical iron caps designed to deflect blows. Their most common weapons were the sturdy, reliable bearded axe, so named for the extended lower blade that allowed for hooking an opponent's shield, and the large, round wooden shield, often painted and rimmed with iron, which was used both for defense and to form the legendary shield wall formation in battle. What truly motivated these part-time soldiers to undertake such dangerous journeys? While plunder was certainly a powerful incentive, it was often about something less tangible but far more powerful in their culture, reputation and honor. Norse society was fiercely competitive and centered around the concept of word fame, the idea that one's deeds and courage would be remembered in stories and songs long after death. The sagas are filled with tales of individual heroics, not to promote reckless vanity, but to illustrate the immense value placed on personal courage and loyalty to one's chieftain. This emphasis on the individual was perfectly balanced by a strong democratic streak. A Viking warband was not a top-down autocracy. Important decisions, from where to raid next to dividing the spoils, were made by consensus at open assemblies called things, where every free man had a right to speak. This combination of personal ambition and collective decision-making created a uniquely potent and adaptable military force. To define them solely by their raids is to ignore their greatest legacy, connection. The same longships that carried raiders also carried settlers bound for Iceland, merchants laden with furs and amber heading for the markets of Constantinople, and explorers venturing into the unknown. They established trade routes that stretched from the Caliphate of Baghdad to the coast of Canada, exchanging silver, silk, spices, and slaves. They founded cities like Dublin and Kiev, and served as the personal bodyguard to the Byzantine emperors, the famed Varangian Guard. They were facilitators of a globalized exchange of goods, ideas, and cultures centuries before the term was invented. The Vikings were not mindless barbarians. They were pragmatic, opportunistic, and astonishingly versatile people who adapted to every role required by their ambition and their environment: farmer, trader, explorer, and when the season was right, a warrior. While the Vikings were masters of the sea and democratic initiative, the Persian Empire perfected a very different kind of military power, one built on psychological dominance, meticulous organization, and an elite corps of soldiers who were as much a symbol as a fighting force. This brings us to the legendary Immortals, the personal guard of the Achaemenid emperors like Darius and Xerxes. Their very name evokes a sense of supernatural dread, and that was entirely the point. Ancient Greek historians, who often portrayed the Persians as the exotic other, recorded that this elite unit was always kept at a strength of exactly 10,000 men. The genius of this system was its illusion. Whenever a soldier fell ill, was wounded, or killed, he was immediately replaced by a pre-trained reservist. To any outside observer, and especially to a nervous enemy watching from across the battlefield, the corps never seemed to diminish. It appeared eternal, unkillable, a literally unstoppable force that fed the propaganda of the emperor's divine right to rule. This was psychological warfare on a grand scale, a masterclass in perception management that began long before the first arrow was ever fired. To become one of these chosen few was a privilege reserved almost exclusively for members of the Persian nobility, the Artishtaran. From a very young age, sons of these influential families were immersed in a comprehensive education designed to create the perfect imperial servant. Their training was the ancient world's equivalent of a special forces induction combined with a diplomatic finishing school. They mastered the trio of Persian aristocratic virtues, riding horses with expert skill, drawing a powerful composite bow with deadly accuracy, and speaking the truth. This last point is crucial. Their concept of honor was deeply tied to honesty and loyalty, directly to the monarch they served. They were drilled in hand-to-hand combat with spears and short swords, but their education also encompassed the complexities of logistics, military administration, and the courtly etiquette required to stand beside the King of Kings. They weren't just brutes, they were the empire's best and brightest, groomed for leadership on and off the field. Their appearance on the battlefield was calculated to overwhelm the senses and shatter enemy morale. Forget the grim, utilitarian uniformity of a Roman legion. The Immortals were a dazzling display of imperial wealth and power. Historical accounts and magnificent reliefs from the palace at Persepolis depict them wearing elaborate, richly colored robes over suits of scale armor. Their heads were topped with intricately woven felt tiaras, and they carried a unique array of weaponry: short stabbing spears, powerful bows with quivers full of arrows, and shields made not of heavy bronze but of lightweight wicker. This was not just about looking impressive. The wicker shield was light enough for an archer to maneuver easily, and their robes, while splendid, were practical for the varied climates of the vast empire, from the frozen mountains of Anatolia to the scorching deserts of Egypt. They were a mobile, versatile force that could project an image of invincible grandeur anywhere. Yet, to confine the Immortals' role to that of a palace guard or frontline troop is to underestimate their true value to the Persian state. They were the multitool of the imperial administration. In times of peace, they formed the majestic backdrop to all court ceremonies, their silent, perfectly aligned ranks reinforcing the power and prestige of the emperor. They were trusted to manage the complex logistics of the royal court, which was essentially a mobile city that traveled with the emperor. Some, chosen for their intelligence and demeanor, even served as diplomatic envoys, carrying the emperor's words to subordinate governors and foreign powers. This blend of martial and civic duty was a hallmark of Persian rule, reflecting a sophisticated understanding that an empire is built as much on efficient administration and cultural persuasion as on military conquest. This leads to perhaps their most surprising characteristic, especially when compared to the Assyrians or even the Spartans: a reputation for relative mercy. The Persian Empire was colossal, a sprawling tapestry of countless different cultures, languages, and religions. Simply butchering every population that resisted was not a sustainable strategy for control. The Persian model, often exemplified by the disciplined immortals, was one of incorporation. After a decisive victory, they were more likely to be tasked with integrating a conquered people into the imperial fold rather than slaughtering them. Local rulers were often left in place as long as they pledged loyalty, paid their taxes, and provided soldiers for the imperial army. This pragmatic approach to empire building created stability and allowed trade, ideas, and culture to flow along the royal road from Sardis to Susa. The immortal, therefore, was not just a destroyer but a facilitator, a highly disciplined instrument of an imperial vision that understood coexistence could be more powerful than pure annihilation. Imagine the sheer intimidation of facing that wall of spear points for the first time. While the Spartan Phalanx was a formidable shield wall and the Roman legion a flexible killing machine, the Macedonian Phalanx was something else entirely. A slow, deliberate, and utterly terrifying agricultural thresher made human. The key to this revolutionary system was the sarissa, a pike so long, nearly 18 feet, that the spear points of the first 5 ranks all projected beyond the front line, creating a dense, rolling thicket of sharpened iron that was virtually impossible to engage with standard weapons. This wasn't about individual dueling. It was about creating an unstoppable, collective forward momentum that would simply grind down and shatter any opposing infantry formation it encountered. The men who wielded these enormous pikes were not aristocrats or career soldiers in the traditional sense. They were the tough, resilient farmers and herdsmen from the Macedonian highlands, men whose daily lives of grueling physical labor had already forged the raw strength and endurance needed to handle the heavy sarissa for hours on end. King Philip II, Alexander's father and the true architect of this system, saw the potential in these hardy rural populations. He professionalized them, offering regular pay and a share of the spoils, transforming them from a seasonal militia into a full-time, highly disciplined standing army loyal first and foremost to the king. Their training was relentless, focused entirely on unit cohesion. They drilled for countless hours to learn complex maneuvers, to wheel and turn in perfect unison, and most importantly, to maintain that critical, unbroken hedge of spear points even over broken ground or under the stress of a cavalry charge. Their lives depended on the man to their left and right, creating a bond of mutual trust that was the true source of the phalanx's power. To achieve the mobility necessary for Alexander's breathtakingly fast campaigns, these infantrymen traveled surprisingly light, especially when compared to the heavily armored Greek hoplite. A phalangite typically wore a simple, open-faced helmet and a linen cuirass, perhaps reinforced with metal scales, but he forewent the heavy bronze plate that would have been exhausting on long marches through the deserts of Persia or the mountains of Afghanistan. His primary protection, aside from a small shield strapped to his forearm to free both hands for the pike, was the sarissa forest itself. This lighter kit allowed Alexander's army to move at a pace that consistently stunned and outmaneuvered their enemies, covering vast distances to appear where they were least expected. Life in the ranks of this conquering army was a world away from the familiar fields of home. A phalangite signed on for a campaign that would last years, pushing further east into lands his people had only heard of in myths. He endured searing heat and freezing cold, unfamiliar foods that upset his stomach, and diseases for which he had no immunity. He fought not just against Persian soldiers, but against scythed chariots, war elephants, and hit-and-run horse archers whose tactics were completely alien to him. Through it all, he was expected to maintain his equipment, cook his meals with his mess unit, and stand his watch, all while upholding the discipline of the formation that was his primary weapon. These ordinary men became the unwilling agents of an incredible cultural exchange. As they marched, they brought Greek language, customs, and ideas with them, planting the seeds of new cities, the Alexandrias, that would become centers of Hellenistic culture for centuries, forever altering the cultural landscape of 3 continents. In the end, the story of the Macedonian Phalangite is the ultimate testament to the power of the collective over the individual hero. While history rightfully remembers the name of Alexander the Great, his legendary conquests from Greece to the Indus River would have been utterly impossible without the thousands of anonymous, disciplined farmers who formed the anvil against which his hammer-like companion cavalry could strike. They received little individual glory, but their unwavering cohesion and endurance built an empire. They remind us that behind every so-called great man of history, there are invariably the countless ordinary souls who did the work, bore the burdens, and faced the dangers, their names lost to time but their achievement echoing through the ages. Now we journey to the misty forests and rolling hills of Iron Age Europe to meet a people whose reputation has been wildly distorted by their enemies. The Romans, who both feared and coveted their lands, gave us the enduring image of the Celtic warrior as a screaming, undisciplined barbarian, a shaggy-haired brute clad in rough skins and driven by mere bloodlust. But to accept this caricature is to miss one of the most sophisticated and spiritually profound warrior cultures of the ancient world. The reality, pieced together from archaeology and the rare accounts that look beyond Roman propaganda, reveals a society where the warrior was not just a fighter, but an artist, a diplomat, a poet, and a deeply religious figure. Their prowess in combat was undeniable, but it was a prowess born from exceptional skill, not mindless fury. They were master metalworkers, producing long swords of such high-quality iron and bronze that they were both lethal and beautifully balanced, often intricately decorated with swirling Latin patterns. These were not crude hacking blades, they were precision instruments for slashing, and their effectiveness is attested to by the Romans, who quickly adopted the Celtic-style sword for their own legionaries. They also wielded spears with deadly accuracy and carried those distinctive large oval shields, often made of wood with a central metal boss, which could be used for both defense and as a punching weapon. And yes, some Celtic warriors did indeed go into battle naked or with bodies painted in intricate designs using woad, a blue plant dye. This was not a sign of primitiveness. It was a powerful psychological and spiritual act. Fighting without armor demonstrated incredible courage and faith in one's own skill and the protection of the gods, while the swirling patterns were believed to be apotropaic, warding off evil and invoking divine power in the chaos of battle. The social world of these warriors was governed by a complex web of personal honor and obligation, completely different from the institutional discipline of Rome or Sparta. At the top of this society were the nobles, and for a noble warrior, his worth was measured by 2 things: his personal bravery or cœur, and his generosity. A great leader was expected to be dazzlingly eloquent in speech and extravagantly generous in gift-giving. He would win followers not by command, but by his charisma and his willingness to share the spoils of war, fine jewelry, weapons, and drinking horns, thereby creating a personal war band bound by deep loyalty. These bonds were the true foundation of a chieftain's power. His followers, in turn, were expected to fight to the death to protect him. To outlive one's lord was a deep and lasting shame. This system created a highly competitive and fluid political landscape where prestige was constantly being won, lost, and contested through raids, cattle rustling, and single combats designed to prove individual heroism. Crucially, the Celtic world was far from isolated. Their reputation as fierce raiders is well earned. Their migrations and attacks spread their culture and terror from the Atlantic coast of Ireland all the way to Anatolia in modern Turkey, where they became known as the Galatians. But to see them only as raiders is a profound mistake. They were also astute and sophisticated traders, controlling vital trade routes for salt, tin, amber, and slaves. They established complex diplomatic relationships with every major power they encountered. They fought as mercenaries for the Greeks and later negotiated as equals with the Romans, with some chieftains even being granted the title of friend of the Roman people. The famous Queen Boudica herself was not just a rebel. She was a client king's wife who understood the nuances of a treaty before it was brutally broken, showing a political awareness that goes far beyond the simple barbarian archetype. Underpinning every aspect of the warrior's life, from the forging of his sword to the decision to go to war, was the profound influence of the Druids. These were not simply priests. They were the philosophers, judges, historians, and political advisors of Celtic society. A Druid's training could take 20 years, all committed to memory, as they preserved the entire history, law, and spiritual knowledge of their people orally. For a warrior, the Druid was an essential guide. They interpreted omens to determine the most auspicious time for battle, presided over sacrifices to win the favor of the gods, and acted as mediators between rival chieftains. They were the keepers of the stories that defined a warrior's purpose, weaving together myth and reality into a cosmic framework that gave meaning to courage and death. It was the Druid who could place a single battle within the context of an entire culture's relationship with the divine, making warfare not just a political act but a sacred one. The Celtic warrior, therefore, stands as a powerful reminder that martial strength and cultural depth are not opposites, but can be intimately intertwined. He fought for personal glory and for his chieftain, but he did so within a rich tapestry of art, trade, diplomacy, and profound spirituality. He was as likely to be found debating in a feast hall as on a battlefield, his identity forged as much by the skilled hands of a craftsman and the wise words of a Druid as by the edge of his own sword. This deep connection between the warrior and the entirety of his community's world offers a far more fascinating and human picture than the old barbarian trope, showing a people who valued the strength of the individual spirit as much as the strength of the tribe. While the Macedonian Phalanx relied on the collective strength of its farmers, the battlefields of the New Kingdom Egypt introduced a weapon of speed, prestige, and breathtaking individual skill, the Charioteer. This was not the domain of the common soldier, but the ancient world's equivalent of a special forces pilot, a role that demanded immense wealth, years of specialized training, and a cool head under pressure. The chariot itself was a technological marvel of its time, a masterpiece of lightweight engineering. Constructed from a flexible wood like birch or ash, it was essentially a mobile platform on wheels, designed for speed and agility rather than protection. A skilled driver could whip a team of 2 horses into a full gallop, allowing an archer to unleash a relentless hailstorm of arrows while remaining a constantly moving, incredibly difficult target for any opposing infantry. This combination of mobility and firepower made them the ultimate shock troops, capable of shredding enemy formations long before the main lines of Egyptian infantry ever closed in. The men who operated these machines were almost exclusively drawn from the highest echelons of society. The cost was simply prohibitive for anyone else. A single chariot required the finest materials crafted by expert woodworkers, leatherworkers, and metalsmiths. Then came the horses themselves, expensive, imported animals that needed constant care, specialized feed, and a team of grooms. This meant your typical charioteer was a nobleman, often the son of a high-ranking official or a landowner who could afford this lavish military entry fee. Their training was a long and arduous process, a partnership forged between two men, the driver or kedjan and the warrior, usually an archer. They had to learn to move and think as a single entity. The driver's job was to control the horses with reins tied around his waist, freeing his hands to hold a shield for both of them, while expertly navigating the chaotic and uneven terrain of a battlefield. Meanwhile, the archer had to maintain his balance on the rocking, jolting platform, drawing and firing his composite bow with lethal accuracy at a full sprint. This was a dance of death requiring perfect synchronization and absolute trust. Their primary tactic, immortalized in tomb paintings and temple reliefs, was the devastating run and gun maneuver. A chariot squadron would race parallel to the enemy lines, its archers leaning out to unleash volley after volley into the packed ranks. The psychological impact alone was terrifying. For foot soldiers armed with spears or axes, these fast-moving platforms were nearly impossible to engage directly. By the time an enemy could react, the chariots would be gone, circling back to safety behind the Egyptian lines to resupply before charging again. This ability to strike with impunity allowed them to soften up targets, break morale, and create gaps in the enemy line for the infantry to exploit. Pharaohs like Thutmose III and Rameses the Great leveraged this tactical superiority to build and maintain an empire that stretched from the fourth cataract of the Nile deep into modern-day Syria. But the life of a charioteer was not without its extreme dangers. The very speed that was their greatest asset was also a constant threat. A wheel hitting a rock or a rabbit hole at full tilt could splinter the entire chariot, catapulting its crew under the hooves of their own horses or the wheels of the chariot behind them. In the heat of battle, a well-aimed javelin or a stray arrow could easily take down a horse, rendering the vehicle instantly useless and leaving the crew stranded and vulnerable. Enemy forces learned to target the horses first for this very reason, and if a charioteer was captured, his high social status was no guarantee of mercy. He could be executed on the spot or, perhaps worse, taken as a prized prisoner to be paraded and humiliated. Beyond the battlefield, the chariot was a powerful multi-purpose symbol of elite status and divine connection. The pharaoh was frequently depicted alone in his chariot, mastering the chaotic forces of nature, often shown as animals during grand hunting expeditions. This imagery was a direct metaphor for his role in maintaining Ma'at, or cosmic order, over the forces of chaos. Chariots were also central to grand religious festivals and victory parades, gleaming with gold and electrum, pulled by the finest horses adorned with plumes and precious ornaments. In these processions, they were less military hardware and more moving altars, designed to project the unimaginable power and divinity of the king and the gods he represented. This seamless blending of practical warfare, social prestige, and religious symbolism shows us that for the ancient Egyptians, technological innovation was never just about more efficient killing. It was a tool to express and reinforce the very order of their world. From the disciplined ranks of the Macedonian Phalanx and the symbolic power of the Egyptian charioteer, we now turn to a force defined by pure, untamed motion, the Hunnic horse archer. These warriors emerged from the vast, wind-swept steppes of Central Asia, a landscape that didn't just shape their tactics, it forged their entire existence. Their life was one of perpetual movement, a constant journey following their herds of sheep, goats, and, most importantly, their horses. This wasn't a choice, it was a necessity for survival in an environment with punishing winters and scarce resources. From the moment a Hunnic boy could walk, he was placed on a horse and a bow was put in his hand. Riding and archery were not military skills. They were the fundamental arts of daily life, as essential for hunting food and protecting the herd from wolves as they were for war. This meant there was no distinction between a civilian and a soldier. Every able-bodied man was a warrior by default, a product of a culture where martial prowess was synonymous with simply being a competent adult. This total integration of life and combat created a military that needed no formal boot camps or drilling grounds. The steppe itself was their training academy, and the lessons were unforgiving. Their supreme advantage, the thing that made them the terror of the late Roman world, was a revolutionary piece of technology that they mastered like no one else: the composite recurve bow. This was not a simple longbow. It was a sophisticated weapon of layered wood, sinew, and horn, carefully laminated together to create immense power in a relatively short package. When drawn, the tips curved away from the archer, storing phenomenal energy that could launch an arrow with enough force to pierce armor at remarkable distances. But the true genius was in its use from horseback. A Hunnic warrior could control his nimble step pony with his knees, leaving both hands free to aim and fire in any direction, even while riding at a full gallop. This combination transformed them into a mobile artillery platform, capable of delivering devastatingly accurate fire while remaining almost untouchable by slower, heavier infantry or cavalry. Their small, shaggy horses were the perfect partners in this incredibly tough, requiring little fodder, and able to endure conditions that would kill the larger breeds stabled in Roman cities. This logistical simplicity meant a Hunnic army could move with breathtaking speed across enormous distances, appearing as if from nowhere and vanishing just as quickly. On the battlefield, their tactics were a masterclass in psychological and physical disruption. They utterly rejected the notion of a static, head-on clash that defined warfare for empires like Rome. Instead, they fought like a pack of wolves harrying a much larger animal. A typical engagement would begin with a swirling, chaotic cloud of mounted archers encircling the enemy formation. They would unleash volley after volley of arrows, not aiming for a decisive blow initially, but to create panic, inflict steady casualties, and goad their opponent into breaking ranks. Their signature maneuver was the feigned retreat, a tactic that required impeccable discipline and trust. A group would appear to break and flee in disorder, tempting the enemy to give chase. Once the pursuing force was strung out and exhausted, separated from their main body, the fleeing Huns would suddenly wheel around, and other hidden units would close in from the flanks, trapping the pursuers and cutting them down. If the enemy refused to take the bait and held its ground, the Huns would simply continue their arrow barrage, slowly grinding the formation down from a distance. Only when the enemy was thoroughly weakened, disorganized, and demoralized would they finally close in for melee combat with their sharp swords and their dreaded lassos, which they used with uncanny skill to snatch riders from their saddles. This entire way of war was possible because the Hunnic army was not a separate entity from their society. It was their society on the move. When they went on campaign, they didn't travel with a baggage train, they brought the baggage train with them. Their families, their elders, their entire wealth in the form of herds, and their felt-walled yurt homes all moved with the warriors. This made them completely self-sufficient for months, even years, living off their animals and the land they passed through. However, this immense strength was also their greatest vulnerability. While a defeated Roman army could retreat to the safety of a fortress or a city, a defeated Hunnic horde had nowhere to retreat to. A lost battle meant not just military casualties, but the potential annihilation of their entire community, the capture of their families, the slaughter of their herds, the end of their people. This ever-present risk helps explain their ferocity and their preference for strategies that minimize their own exposure to heavy casualties. Our understanding of these remarkable people is frustratingly filtered through the fear and prejudice of their enemies. The Romans and the Goths, who bore the brunt of their attacks, left written accounts that paint them as monstrous subhumans, filthy and savage, the literal scourge of God. They left almost no written records of their own, no grand monuments or inscriptions. To truly know them, we must look to archaeology, the remains of their settlements, their intricate goldwork and jewelry that shows a sophisticated artistic sense, and the forensic evidence from their graves. This evidence reveals a people far more complex than the Roman caricature, with a rich material culture and a social structure that could produce a leader like Attila, who skillfully wielded both terror and diplomacy to forge a short-lived but earth-shaking empire that stretched from the grasslands of Central Asia to the heart of France, fundamentally altering the map and the destiny of Europe. The Hunnic warrior's story is the ultimate testament to specialization, proving that a people perfectly adapted to their environment and wholly dedicated to a single, fluid way of war could challenge and humble the greatest empires on earth. In the heart of Mesoamerica, a young Aztec boy's path to greatness did not begin on a battlefield, but within the hallowed walls of a school called the Comicac. This was no ordinary academy. It was a rigorous institution reserved for the sons of nobility, designed to forge the next generation of leaders, priests, and most prestigiously, the elite Jaguar and Eagle warriors. Here, education was a holistic fusion of the mortal and the divine, alongside mastering the use of the macuahuitl, a fearsome wooden sword edged with razor-sharp obsidian blades, and the atlatl, or spear thrower. Students were immersed in astronomy, calendrics, and the complex layers of Aztec theology. They learned to read intricate pictographic texts, memorize sacred hymns, and endure grueling physical ordeals like bloodletting rituals, all to cultivate the discipline, piety, and strategic mind required to one day embody a divine force on the field of battle. The ultimate goal for a warrior in this society was profoundly different from that of a Roman legionary or a Spartan hoplite. While killing an enemy in combat might happen, the highest honor and the surest path to advancement was not to kill but to capture. A warrior's worth was measured in live prisoners. This was not merely a tactical objective, it was a sacred duty. The Aztec cosmos was believed to be sustained by a constant offering of chalchiuhuatl, or precious water, a poetic term for human blood. Without a continuous supply of sacrificial victims to nourish the gods, particularly the sun god Huitzilopochtli, it was believed the sun would cease to rise and the world would end. Therefore, every battle, every act of warfare was fundamentally a religious act, a collective effort to gather the sacred sustenance needed to maintain the cosmic order. A warrior who could subdue and bring back a strong, worthy captive was not just a skilled fighter, he was a vital provider for the very gods themselves. Upon achieving this incredible feat, a warrior was inducted into one of the two revered military orders. He would shed his previous identity and don the magnificent, full-body regalia of either the Jaguar warrior or the Eagle warrior. This was far more than a uniform, it was a ritual transformation. The Jaguar knight, clad in a spotted pelt, became an earthly manifestation of the powerful nocturnal feline, a creature of the underworld representing stealth, strength, and the raw power of the earth. The Eagle Knight, adorned with a magnificent feathered headdress and beak, transformed into a celestial being, a symbol of the sun, the sky, and the sharp, untamed freedom of the heavens. In putting on these suits, these men were not just wearing costumes, they were becoming living avatars, channeling the spirit and power of these sacred animals into the fray. Their presence on the battlefield was meant to inspire both awe in their comrades and sheer terror in their enemies. This exalted status came with immense tangible rewards. Jaguar and Eagle warriors were granted extensive tracts of land to support themselves and their families, freeing them from manual labor. They received a share of the tribute, food, cloth, luxury goods flowing into the capital of Tenochtitlan from conquered cities. Perhaps most significantly, they earned a voice. They were invited to war councils and had the right to participate in the political life of their calpuli, or district, wielding real influence in the governance of the empire. Yet with this high status came an equally high expectation of humility and piety. Their success was not seen as a product of their individual prowess alone, but as a gift from the gods. To become arrogant or to forget their role as humble servants of the divine order was a grave transgression. Their lives were a constant balance between the glory of the warrior and the devotion of the priest. While the famous flower wars were highly ritualized conflicts staged specifically to gather sacrificial captives, it would be a mistake to view the Aztec warrior as solely a participant in a sacred game. The Aztec Empire was a vast, expansionist state, and its military might was also deployed for very pragmatic reasons: to conquer new territories, subjugate rebellious provinces, and control crucial trade routes for resources like cocoa, gold, and feathers. In these campaigns, the goal was conquest, and the tactics could be just as brutal and decisive as any employed in the Old World. The Jaguar and Eagle warriors formed the elite shock troops of these armies, leading assaults and breaking enemy lines. This dual purpose, the spiritual need for captives and the political drive for expansion, showcases the fascinating complexity of the Aztec world, where the sacred and the secular were seamlessly and powerfully intertwined in the figure of the warrior. Now let's step onto the sun-baked soil of ancient Greece, where the concept of the citizen soldier was born. Forget the image of a full-time, state-paid warrior. The hoplite was, first and foremost, a man of the land. He was a farmer who tended his olive groves and vineyards, a family man, and an active participant in the political life of his city-state, his polis. When the call to arms came, he would retrieve his own carefully maintained armor and weapons from his home, kiss his family goodbye, and march out to defend not a king or a general, but his very own way of life. His entire existence was a balance between the plow and the spear, and this duality was the very foundation of his identity and the emerging idea of Greek democracy. The moment he donned his panoply, he was transformed. This was no light undertaking. His gear, known as a panoply, could weigh well over 50 pounds, a formidable burden to carry into the heat of a Greek summer. It started with the bronze Corinthian helmet, a masterpiece of protection that also severely limited his vision and hearing, forcing him to rely on the men beside him. A bronze breastplate protected his torso, while greaves shielded his shins. His primary weapon was the dory, a long thrusting spear around 8 feet in length, with a lethal iron head at one end and a bronze spike, called a Charioteer, at the other, which could be planted in the ground to receive a charge or used as a secondary weapon if the spear shaft shattered. But the most important piece of equipment, both physically and symbolically, was his shield, the aspis. This was a large, round, deeply concave shield made of wood and covered in a thin layer of bronze. It was heavy, weighing nearly 20 pounds, and was designed to be held by a unique double grip, an arm, and in the center and a hand grip near the rim. This allowed him to support its weight and wield it effectively, but its true purpose was revealed only in formation, for the hoplite did not fight alone. His entire worth as a warrior was defined by his place in the phalanx. This was a tightly packed formation, usually 8 ranks deep, where each man's life literally depended on the man to his right. The genius of the aspis was that its large size and unique grip meant it protected the bearer's left side, while its right edge extended to cover the unprotected right side of the hoplite standing next to him. Your shield was not just for your own protection, it was a communal tool for the safety of the entire line. To abandon your shield in retreat was the ultimate dishonor, not because you lost expensive gear, but because you had exposed your comrade and betrayed the trust of the entire formation. This created an unbreakable bond of mutual dependence. The battle itself, the Othismos, translates literally to the push. It was less a melee of individual duels and more a terrifying collective shoving match between two heavily armored human bulldozers. The goal was to maintain cohesion, push forward, and literally break the enemy's formation, causing a rout. Victory was a collective achievement celebrated by the entire community. This direct link between military service and political power was the Hoplite's most enduring legacy. In most Greek city-states, particularly Athens, the right to participate in the assembly, to vote, to hold office, in short, the full rights of citizenship, were intrinsically tied to the ability to serve as a hoplite. You were expected to fight for your city because you had a literal stake in it. This created a powerful form of egalitarianism among the propertied class. In the phalanx, a wealthy landowner stood shoulder to shoulder with a modest farmer, their lives equally dependent on one another. This shared experience of risk and reliance forged a powerful sense of civic duty and common purpose that flowed directly from the battlefield into the political arena. The debates in the assembly were, in a way, an extension of the phalanx, a collective effort to defend and guide the polis, where every citizen's voice, like every hoplite shield, was needed for the whole to function. When the campaign was over, the hoplite did not return to a barracks. He hung up his armor, picked up his tools, and went back to his farm. He resumed his life as a father, a husband, and a neighbor. There was no permanent separation between his military and civilian selves. They were two sides of the same coin. This everyday reality meant that warfare was a disruptive but integral part of the rhythm of life, not a distant profession. The man who had pushed in the deadly press of the phalanx was the same man who would debate you in the agora and whose children played with yours. This integration ensured that decisions about war and peace were made by those who would actually have to fight it, creating a deeply personal and responsible connection to the fate of the community. The hoplite, therefore, was more than just a soldier. He was the living embodiment of the idea that the defense of freedom and the responsibilities of citizenship are inseparable, a concept that would echo through the centuries and shape the very foundations of Western political thought. If the legions of Rome built an empire with roads and discipline, and the phalanxes of Greece with citizen courage, the armies of Assyria forged theirs with two equally potent tools: overwhelming terror and breathtaking engineering. This was not a militia called upon in times of need. This was history's first truly professional, standing imperial war machine, funded and equipped by the state to pursue a single, relentless goal: permanent expansion. An Assyrian soldier was a full-time employee of conquest, receiving regular pay, rations, and equipment, which created a force of careerists whose entire lives were dedicated to the art of war. This professional status allowed for a level of training and specialization unheard of in the region. While a farmer from a rival kingdom might be handed a spear for a seasonal campaign, an Assyrian warrior was drilled year-round in complex combined arms tactics, the intricacies of siegecraft, and a particularly chilling form of psychological warfare designed to win battles before they even began by shattering the enemy's will to fight. The psychological aspect was a calculated, systematic policy orchestrated from the very top. The grand stone reliefs that adorned the palaces of kings like Ashurnasirpal and Sennacherib were not just decorations. They were a form of imperial propaganda, a chilling newsreel carved into the walls. They depict scenes of almost cinematic brutality, soldiers beheading captives, piling up pyramids of skulls, and flaying rebel leaders alive. But these weren't mere boasts of cruelty. They were messages. Envoys from rival states and potential rebels would see these images and understand the horrific, non-negotiable cost of defiance. The army itself was an instrument of this terror. They practiced deportation on a massive scale, uprooting entire populations from their ancestral homes and resettling them in distant parts of the empire. This served a dual purpose. It broke up regional identities that could fuel rebellion, and it provided a source of labor for the empire's massive construction projects. The goal was to create a reputation so fearsome that cities would simply open their gates at the approach of the Assyrian army, choosing subjugation over annihilation. Yet to focus solely on their brutality is to miss half of their genius, for they were also the ancient world's most innovative and relentless engineers. Their greatest advantage was logistical. They constructed a vast network of paved roads and bridges to allow their armies, and the colossal supply trains that followed them, to move with unprecedented speed across the empire. They built fortified supply depots along these routes, ensuring that their troops were well provisioned even in hostile territory. This engineering prowess reached its zenith in siege warfare. While other armies might starve a city into submission over months, the Assyrians developed a terrifying array of machinery to smash their way in. They used massive siege towers, taller than the walls they assaulted, to provide covering fire for their archers. They deployed sophisticated battering rams, housed in protective shelters and often tipped with iron, to pound at gateways and weak points in the stonework. Perhaps most impressively, they were masters of sapping digging tunnels under fortifications to collapse them from below. They would literally move earth and reshape the landscape to achieve victory. The life of the common Assyrian soldier, however, was one of extreme hardship juxtaposed with opportunity. His days were filled with grueling marches under the burning sun, the constant threat of disease in crowded camps, and the ever-present danger of combat against desperate defenders. Discipline was brutally enforced. Desertion or cowardice was punishable by death. Yet, for those who showed courage and skill, the army offered a path to advancement that was rare in the ancient world. A talented infantryman could rise through the ranks, gaining command of units, receiving shares of plunder, and earning grants of land after his service. The army was a meritocracy where proven ability could trump social origin, a system that ensured a constant supply of motivated and capable leaders. They were equipped with the best technology of the age, pointed bronze helmets, long coats of iron scale armor that offered excellent protection, powerful composite bows, and long, straight iron swords. The Assyrian soldier, therefore, stands as a terrifying but revolutionary figure in military history. He was the product of a system that understood that conquest required more than just brave men with sharp spears. It required an entire infrastructure of terror, logistics, and technology working in concert. He was both the wielder of the executioner's axe and the builder of the road that got him there. This fearsome combination of brute force and brilliant organization allowed a relatively small kingdom in Mesopotamia to dominate the Near East for centuries, creating a blueprint for empire that every subsequent power, from Babylon to Persia to Rome, would study, emulate, and ultimately strive to surpass. While the heavy infantry of Rome and Greece often dominate the history books, the arid landscapes of North Africa produced a warrior whose true weapon was not a sword or spear, but the very ground beneath his horse's hooves. The Numidian cavalryman was a master of his environment, a phantom on horseback who could materialize from a dust cloud, unleash chaos, and vanish before a heavier armed opponent could even react. His entire existence was a testament to the idea that in warfare, speed and intelligence could often triumph over brute strength and armor. Clad in little more than a simple tunic and perhaps a light leather shield, he presented a minimal target, relying on his incredible agility and the endurance of his mount to negate the need for cumbersome protection. Armed with a bundle of javelins and a small, round shield, he was the ultimate skirmisher, a specialist in the art of the feint, the ambush, and the relentless, demoralizing harassment that could break the spirit of the most disciplined army long before the main battle lines ever met. This extraordinary prowess was not a taught skill but a birthright, woven into the fabric of the Berber tribes from which these horsemen came. From the moment a Numidian boy could walk, he was learning to ride. The horses they used were not the powerful, grain-fed chargers of European knights. They were small, tough, and incredibly resilient North African barbs, a breed perfectly adapted to the harsh, unforgiving terrain of mountains, scrubland, and desert. These animals could thrive on sparse vegetation, cover vast distances with minimal water, and navigate rocky, uneven ground that would cripple a larger, heavier breed. This intimate, lifelong bond between rider and horse created a synergy that was almost supernatural. A Numidian warrior could guide his mount with the pressure of his knees, leaving both hands free to aim and throw his javelins with deadly accuracy, even at a full gallop. He was not so much a man on a horse as a single, fluid creature, a centaur of the sun-baked plains. This unique skill set made them the most sought-after mercenaries in the entire Western Mediterranean, and their allegiances often tipped the scales of history. They are most famously remembered for their service to the Carthaginian general Hannibal during his audacious invasion of Italy. At the monumental Battle of Cannae, their role was absolutely pivotal. As the massive Roman legions pressed forward, confident in their numerical superiority, the Numidian cavalry on Hannibal's flanks engaged their Roman counterparts. Using their signature hit-and-run tactics, they drew the Roman cavalry away from the main infantry body, disrupting their formations and eventually routing them. This critical action left the Roman infantry flanks completely exposed, allowing Hannibal's center to collapse in a classic double envelopment that ended in one of the most devastating defeats in Roman history. The Numidians didn't deliver the killing blow themselves, but they created the perfect conditions for it to happen, proving that a supporting force could be the true architect of victory. Their lifestyle was their greatest logistical advantage. As a semi-nomadic people whose wealth was measured in herds, they were perpetually mobile. This meant mustering a force of Numidian cavalry did not require a lengthy conscription process or a massive supply train. A chieftain could call his followers to arms, and within days, a highly effective light cavalry force would be ready to move. They carried their own provisions or lived off the land, requiring none of the complex infrastructure that slowed down armies like Rome's. This allowed them to strike with shocking speed and operate deep behind enemy lines for extended periods, raiding supply convoys, scouting troop movements, and disappearing back into the wilderness. They were the ultimate force multipliers, a low-cost, high-impact asset that could cripple a larger, more conventional army through 1,000 small cuts rather than a single decisive clash. Despite their profound impact on the course of the Punic Wars and other conflicts, the Numidian cavalrymen rarely received the individual glory bestowed upon legionary commanders or cataphract officers. They were often viewed by the great powers they served as auxiliary troops, useful tools rather than noble warriors. Their contributions were recorded by historians like Polybius and Livy, but usually as a faceless component of a larger army, their decisive maneuvers noted without the celebration given to the generals who commanded them. Yet history shows time and again that their presence or absence could determine the fate of empires. At the Battle of Zama, which finally ended the Second Punic War, it was the Numidian Cavalry, this time fighting for Rome under their king Massinissa, that once again played a crucial role, pursuing and harrying the Carthaginian cavalry from the field before returning to smash into the rear of Hannibal's veteran infantry. The Numidian story is a powerful lesson in military history, demonstrating that victory does not always belong to the heaviest or most glamorous troops, but often to those whose specialized skills and deep understanding of their craft allow them to control the tempo and terrain of the fight itself. Buried in silent, disciplined ranks for over 2 millennia, the Terracotta army of Qin Shi Huang stands as one of history's most breathtaking archaeological discoveries. Yet these thousands of clay soldiers are far more than artistic marvels. They are a perfect, frozen mirror of the very real military machine that forged China into a single empire. The first emperor's ambition was boundless, and his vision for the afterlife was no different. He believed his power and his need for protection would extend beyond death, and so he commissioned a subterranean replica of his entire imperial guard, an eternal garrison to defend him in the spiritual realm. But this was no generic, mass-produced sculpture garden. The staggering detail reveals a profound respect for the individual soldier. Each of the estimated 8,000 figures was crafted with unique facial features, suggesting they were modeled from live subjects. You can see the regional diversity of the Qin army in their varied hairstyles, from intricate top knots to simpler braids, and their expressions range from serene confidence to determined resolve, each one a snapshot of a real man who served. Their rank and role are meticulously indicated by their posture and armor, from kneeling archers caught in the act of loading their crossbows to standing infantrymen, cavalrymen with their sturdy steeds, and stern officers who project an air of command even in clay. This mind-boggling individuality transforms the entire mausoleum from a monument into a census, a frozen moment honoring every cog in the vast machine that achieved the impossible. The authenticity extends to the very weapons they held, which were decidedly not for show. When archaeologists first excavated the pits, they made a startling discovery. Stacked in neat bundles near the figures were thousands of actual bronze weapons: swords, spears, dagger axes, and triggers for crossbows. These were not ceramic replicas. They were the genuine, lethal articles issued to the emperor's troops. Most astonishingly, after 2,000 years buried in the damp earth, many of the bronze swords were still sharp, their edges retaining a mirror-like finish and showing no signs of corrosion. This remarkable preservation was due to a sophisticated chromium dioxide coating applied to the metal, an advanced anti-rust technology that would not be reinvented in the West for another 2,000 years. The crossbow triggers, equally mass-produced, were made from interchangeable bronze components, suggesting a level of standardized manufacturing and logistical organization that rivals modern assembly lines. This arsenal proves that the Qin's success was built not just on the courage of its soldiers, but on a terrifying industrial and technological superiority that outfitted them with the best weapons of their age. This entire undertaking, the scale, the detail, the organization, serves as a powerful metaphor for the Qin state itself. The same relentless discipline, the same obsession with order, and the same top-down control that built this clay army were the very principles that allowed the real Qin army to conquer and subdue 6 rival warring states. The real soldiers who inspired these statues lived under a legalist system of government that was brutally efficient. They were rewarded handsomely for battlefield achievements. Promotions and honors were based solely on the number of enemy heads a soldier could collect, but they faced draconian punishment for any failure. Their lives were spent in a constant state of campaign, building the roads and infrastructure that allowed their armies to move swiftly, and enforcing the harsh, standardized laws that stripped local nobility of their power and united the realm under a single, iron-fisted administration. Ultimately, the silent, enduring vigil of the Terracotta warriors reminds us of a profound and very human truth often lost in the broad sweep of history. While we remember the name of the emperor they served, these figures force us to consider the countless individuals who made his ambition a reality. Each unique face in that clay army represents a real person with a story, with fears, with a home he left behind, and with a role in one of history's most monumental achievements. They were not faceless automatons but men who, through their collective discipline and sacrifice, changed the world. They stand forever in formation, an eternal testament to the individual humanity that forms the foundation of every great historical force. From the rugged highlanders of Macedonia to the disciplined ranks of the kin, we've seen how environment and society shape a warrior. But no force in history mastered their environment and turned it into a weapon quite like the Mongols. Their story begins not in grand cities or training academies, but on the vast, windswept grasslands of the Asian steppe, a sea of grass where survival itself was a daily battle. This harsh, open landscape didn't just house the Mongols, it forged them. From the moment a child could walk, they were placed on the back of a horse. Their entire culture was built around the animal. They lived on horse milk. They slept in felt tents called jurs that could be packed onto carts in minutes, and they measured wealth in herds, not land. This constant nomadic movement meant that every aspect of life, hunting, herding, migrating, was a drill for warfare. A boy learned to track, to navigate by the stars, to endure blistering heat and freezing cold, and most importantly, to fire a bow with pinpoint accuracy from a galloping horse. By the time he was a teenager, he was already a veteran of a dozen skirmishes and survival ordeals. There was no distinction between civilian and soldier. The entire society was a mobile, self-sufficient military camp, and every able-bodied man was a ready-made warrior, honed by the relentless demands of the steppe. Their primary instrument of conquest was a technological marvel that gave them a crushing advantage, the composite recurve bow. This was no simple longbow. It was a sophisticated laminate of wood, sinew, and horn, carefully glued and shaped into a double-curved design that stored phenomenal energy. When drawn, it could launch an arrow with enough force to pierce armor at distances of over 300 yards, far outranging anything their enemies possessed. But the true genius was in its use. A Mongol warrior could control his small, incredibly tough steppe pony with his knees, leaving both hands free to aim and fire in any direction, even while riding at a full gallop. He carried multiple quivers, each with different types of arrows for different purposes: armor-piercing bodkin points, broad-headed arrows to cripple horses, and even whistling arrows used for signaling commands across the chaotic noise of the battlefield. This combination of mobility and firepower transformed each rider into an independent, mobile artillery unit, capable of overwhelming opponents who were still relying on static formations and close-quarters combat. On the battlefield, their tactics were a masterclass in coordinated chaos and psychological manipulation. They utterly rejected the notion of a heroic, head-on charge. Instead, they fought like a wolf pack hunting a much larger animal. A typical engagement would begin with multiple small units or arbans of 10 men each, swarming around the enemy flanks. They would unleash volley after volley of arrows, not to wipe out the enemy immediately, but to probe for weakness, inflict steady casualties, and most importantly, provoke a reaction. Their signature maneuver was the feigned retreat, a tactic that required iron discipline and perfect trust. A unit would appear to break and flee in disarray, tempting the enemy to give chase. Once the pursuing force was strung out, exhausted, and separated from its main body, the fleeing Mongols would suddenly wheel around. Pre-positioned units would then close the trap, surrounding the pursuers and cutting them down with arrows from all sides. They used terrifying psychological warfare, often driving captured prisoners ahead of them as human shields to absorb enemy arrows and break defensive morale. The goal was always to win with minimal risk to themselves, to shatter the enemy's cohesion and will to fight long before the costly and unpredictable melee ever began. Perhaps the most surprising aspect of the Mongol warrior, given his fierce reputation, was his profound pragmatism and adaptability once the battle was won. While they were utterly ruthless to those who resisted, using terror as a calculated tool to encourage future surrenders, they were remarkably open-minded and efficient rulers. Unlike many conquerors who sought to impose their own culture and religion, the Mongols were fascinated by new ideas. They practiced stunning religious tolerance, inviting Buddhist monks, Muslim scholars, Christian missionaries, and Taoist priests to their court to debate and share wisdom. They were voracious adopters of new technology, eagerly employing Chinese siege engineers to build catapults and trebuchets that could reduce the mightiest walled cities to rubble, a skill they had lacked on the open steppe. They implemented a meritocratic system where talent was rewarded over birthright. A skilled Persian administrator or a courageous European turncoat could rise as high as a born Mongol noble. This willingness to learn from and incorporate the very people they defeated was their ultimate strategic advantage, turning conquered specialists into instruments of further expansion. The glue that held this vast, mobile empire together was an unprecedented communications and logistics network known as the YAM. This was a series of relay stations spaced a day's ride apart that stretched across the entire breadth of Asia. At each station, fresh horses, food, and lodging awaited authorized messengers. This system allowed vital intelligence, orders, and news to travel from one end of the empire to the other in a matter of weeks, a speed that would not be matched until the invention of the telegraph. A general in Hungary could receive strategic directives from the Great Khan in Mongolia, allowing for coordinated campaigns across thousands of miles. This network also protected and facilitated the flow of trade along the Silk Road, creating a period of unprecedented exchange of goods, ideas, and cultures between East and West. The Mongol warrior, therefore, was not just a destroyer of cities but an accidental unifier of continents. His legacy a complex tapestry of calculated terror, brilliant innovation, and a surprising openness that reshaped the world. Beyond the ordered walls of the Roman Empire lay a world the legions never truly conquered, a vast, shadowy landscape of dark forests and misty bogs, home to a people who embodied a spirit of ferocious independence. The Romans, viewing them from the safety of their stone forts and paved roads, dismissed these Germanic tribesmen as primitive barbarians, shaggy-haired brutes lacking civilization. But this arrogant view, preserved in Roman texts, completely missed the sophisticated and deeply rooted culture that thrived in those so-called wilds. These were not mere savages, they were skilled farmers who cultivated the tough northern soil, expert metalworkers who forged weapons of exceptional quality, and astute traders who connected the Baltic Sea to the heart of Europe. Their identity as warriors was not separate from these other roles. It was an intrinsic part of a holistic way of life, a defense of their most cherished possession, personal freedom. Their approach to warfare was a direct reflection of their environment and their values. They did not fight in neat, disciplined lines on open fields. That was the Roman way. Instead, they mastered the art of the ambush and the guerrilla skirmish, using the dense, trackless forests and the treacherous marshes of northern Europe as their greatest allies. A Roman legion, a masterpiece of orderly engineering, became a vulnerable, clanking beast when forced to break its formation to navigate a narrow forest path or a soggy bog. This is where the Germanic warrior struck, armed with their framer, a versatile spear that could be thrown with deadly accuracy or used for thrusting in close combat. Along with long, slashing swords and sturdy round shields, they would emerge from the mist and the trees, attack with terrifying speed, and melt back into the landscape before a proper counterattack could be organized. They fought not to hold ground in a set-piece battle, but to harass, demoralize, and inflict maximum damage on an invader who could never pin them down. The glue that held this seemingly chaotic way of war together was a powerful social contract known as the comitatus. This was a sacred bond of mutual loyalty between a chieftain and his band of warriors, his comitatus. A young warrior would swear a solemn oath to fight for his chieftain to the death, a pledge that was more personal and profound than any duty to an abstract state or emperor. In return, the chieftain was obligated to provide his men with protection, a place at his table, a share of the plunder from raids, and precious gifts like fine weapons, jewelry, or rings that symbolized their status and his generosity. This system created incredibly tight-knit, motivated war bands. A chieftain's power was measured not by the land he controlled, but by the size and quality of his loyal retinue. To be a generous lord was to be a powerful one, and to be a courageous retainer was to secure one's place in the social order. This personal bond of honor and reward was often a stronger motivator than the institutionalized discipline that held the Roman legions together. This fierce independence was both their greatest strength and their most significant weakness. The Germanic world was a fractured mosaic of numerous tribes: the Cherusci, the Chatti, the Suebi, the Marcomanni, each fiercely proud and often locked in bitter rivalries with their neighbors. They fought over grazing land, trading rights, and personal slights. For centuries, this internal division was what prevented them from being a unified threat to Rome. However, when faced with an existential external threat, they demonstrated a remarkable, if temporary, capacity for alliance. The legendary event that proved this was the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD. A Roman-trained auxiliary officer named Arminius, a chieftain of the Cherusci, saw the looming threat of direct Roman occupation. He secretly united several rival tribes, luring 3 entire legions under the command of Publius Quinctilius Varus deep into the forest. There, using their familiar tactics of ambush and terrain, the Germanic warriors annihilated all 3 legions, effectively ending Roman ambitions to conquer Germania beyond the Rhine River. This battle wasn't won by a single tribe, but by a coalition forged from a shared desire to protect their way of life from an alien system of rule. To define these warriors solely by their conflict with Rome is to ignore the rich tapestry of their daily lives and beliefs. They were a people governed by discussion and consensus. Free men participated in tribal assemblies called things, where laws were debated, disputes were settled, and major decisions like declaring war were made. Afterward, they would celebrate with great feasts, drinking ale from horns and listening to scops. Skilled poets and storytellers recite epic tales of gods and heroes. These stories were part of a rich oral mythology that would later be written down, forming the Norse Eddas and the Germanic sagas that are the bedrock of much of European folklore. Their spiritual world was populated by powerful, often capricious gods like Odin the All-Father and Thor the Thunderer, deities who valued courage, fate, and cunning. This cultural world, with its emphasis on community decision-making, personal reputation, and epic storytelling, reveals a society far more complex and compelling than the simple barbarian label could ever convey. The Germanic warrior fought not for an empire, but for his immediate community, his personal honor, and the freedom to live according to the customs of his ancestors. A powerful blend of individual fierceness and deep tribal loyalty, that would eventually reshape the continent itself. While the swift Numidian horsemen relied on speed and terrain, the Byzantine Empire perfected a warrior of an entirely different kind, one who moved with the deliberate, earth-shaking force of a tidal wave of steel. Imagine the sun glinting off not just one, but countless figures, each a man and horse fused into a single, near-impervious entity. This was the cataphract, the culmination of centuries of military evolution, and the dominant force on the battlefields of the medieval Eastern Roman Empire. His very appearance was designed to instill a primal fear, a walking fortress whose approach signaled an inevitable, crushing end for those who stood in his path. The staggering cost of fielding such a warrior meant he was almost never a commoner. To outfit a single cataphract required the resources of a substantial estate. His armor was a masterpiece of layered defense. Countless small iron or leather plates, known as lamella, were meticulously laced together with sturdy leather cords to form flexible yet incredibly protective coats for both man and steed. He wore a conical helmet with a mail aventail protecting his neck and face, while his horse was draped in a chamfron to armor its head, and a blanket of felt or leather covered in overlapping plates to shield its body. This full barding transformed the animal into a living battering ram. His arsenal was equally comprehensive, built for every range of a chaotic engagement. He carried a long, heavy lance called a contos, often wielded two-handed and sometimes fitted with a leather strap to help couch it under his arm for the full weight of the charge. At his side hung a cavalry sword, a mace for crushing armored opponents, and a powerful composite bow, making him a lethal threat whether at a distance or in the thick of the press. This blend of equipment reveals the cataphract's unique genius. He was a hybrid warrior, a fusion of two distinct military traditions. From the Latin West, he inherited the concept of the decisive, heavy shock charge, the kind that could break a line through sheer mass and momentum. From the nomadic steppe peoples of the East, the Persians, Avars, and later the Turks, he adopted the deadly skill of horse archery and the tactical flexibility it afforded. This made the cataphract uniquely versatile. He could skirmish with light cavalry using his bow, hold a defensive position with the resilience of heavy infantry, or deliver a charge that could overturn the outcome of an entire battle. This adaptability was the key to the Byzantine army's longevity, allowing it to effectively counter the vastly different threats posed by Arab infantry, Bulgarian cavalry, and Viking raiders over the centuries. Such a complex and coordinated form of warfare demanded relentless, specialized training. A cataphract charge was not a wild, headlong gallop. It was a carefully orchestrated maneuver that required impeccable discipline and unit cohesion. Drills focused on maintaining tight formations at various speeds, wheeling in unison, and executing the devastating shock charge at the precise moment an enemy formation showed weakness. The timing had to be perfect. A charge that launched too early would exhaust the horses before impact, while one that was too late would miss the critical opportunity. This emphasis on synchronized action meant the cataphract's value lay not in individual heroics, but in his ability to function as part of a perfectly tuned machine, a testament to the Byzantine emphasis on order, strategy, and professional drill that echoed the legions of old Rome. Their role extended far beyond the battlefield, reflecting their high status within the intricate Byzantine world. As members of the landowning military aristocracy, they were often granted tracts of land in exchange for their service, a system that ensured the empire had a steady supply of these expensive troops without the constant drain on the imperial treasury. In times of peace, cataphracts and their units were deployed to patrol the vast borders of the empire, a daunting task that stretched from the Danube to the Euphrates. Their imposing presence was a powerful deterrent to raiders and a show of force to neighboring states. Furthermore, their elite status and military prowess made them natural candidates for sensitive diplomatic missions, escorting ambassadors, or serving as the emperor's personal guard in the treacherous political landscape of Constantinople, where a sharp mind was often as important as a strong sword arm. The cataphract stands as a brilliant example of military adaptation. He was not a sudden invention but the final product of a long evolution, beginning with the lighter Roman cavalry of the late empire that struggled against Persian cataphracts and evolving through centuries of conflict with a myriad of enemies. The Byzantine military mind, as documented in detailed tactical manuals, analyzed these threats and systematically incorporated the best elements into their own forces. The cataphract's development shows a sophisticated understanding that to survive, an empire must be willing to learn from its adversaries, adopting new technologies and tactics to meet an ever-changing world. This relentless pragmatism and capacity for innovation is what allowed the Eastern Roman Empire to endure for 1,000 years after the fall of Rome itself. While the cataphract represented the pinnacle of heavy, state-sponsored warfare in the Old World, the story of the warrior in the Americas unfolds with a breathtaking diversity that defies any single definition. Here, the very concept of a soldier was woven into the fabric of daily life, the spiritual world, and a deep, intimate relationship with the land itself. Unlike the full-time legionary or the full-time samurai, the indigenous warrior was first and foremost a member of his community, a hunter who provided food, a farmer who tended crops, and a father who taught his children the stories of his people. His identity as a fighter was often seasonal or situational, called upon to defend his village, to conduct a raid for resources or prestige, or to fulfill a sacred obligation. This integration meant that warfare was not a separate profession but an extension of his role as a provider and protector, deeply connected to the survival and honor of his entire community. The sheer variety of environments across the continents gave rise to an equally stunning array of specialized combat styles, each a masterclass in adapting technology to terrain. On the sweeping grasslands of the Great Plains, the Comanche people revolutionized warfare after the reintroduction of the horse by the Spanish. They became unparalleled equestrian archers, capable of firing a dozen arrows with deadly accuracy while hanging off the side of a galloping horse, using the animal as a living shield. This incredible mobility allowed them to dominate a vast territory, controlling trade and resisting expansion for generations. Meanwhile, high in the cloud forests of the Andes, the Inca soldier relied on a completely different set of tools. His sling, woven from llama wool, was not a child's toy but a fearsome weapon. A skilled slinger could hurl a stone the size of a fist with enough force to crack a Spanish conquistador's helmet at over 100 yards, and they could launch these projectiles in terrifying volleys from high above on mountain passes. Further north, in the dense woodlands of eastern North America, warriors perfected the art of the ambush. Moving with silent stealth through the forest, they used the tomahawk, a versatile axe that could be used for throwing or hand-to-hand combat, and the gunstock war club, a brutally efficient weapon designed to maximize the force of a blow against an opponent's head. And in the empires of Mesoamerica, the Aztec Jaguar and Eagle warriors wielded the macuahuitl, a wooden sword edged with razor-sharp obsidian blades that could inflict horrific wounds, capable of even decapitating a horse in the hands of a skilled fighter. Each weapon was a direct reflection of the materials at hand and the specific challenges of their environment. This environmental mastery extended far beyond weaponry into the very heart of their strategy. Indigenous tactics overwhelmingly favored intelligence, terrain, and psychological pressure over the kind of large-scale, set-piece battles common in Europe. Why meet a larger, better-equipped force on an open field where their advantages were nullified? Instead, indigenous warriors leveraged their superior knowledge of the land to magnificent effect. They would lead invading armies into ambushes in narrow canyons, harass supply lines with hit-and-run attacks, and use the cover of darkness to raid enemy camps, eroding their will to fight without ever engaging in a decisive confrontation. The goal was often to demonstrate courage, to capture prisoners, or to inflict enough economic and psychological damage that the enemy would simply abandon their campaign. This asymmetrical approach allowed smaller, less centralized groups to resist technologically superior invaders for decades, and in some cases, centuries, proving that a deep understanding of one's home could be the ultimate force multiplier. Underpinning every aspect of warfare was a profound spiritual dimension that connected the warrior to his ancestors and the cosmos. Across countless cultures, preparation for battle was as much a ritual undertaking as a physical one. Young men might embark on vision quests, spending days alone in the wilderness without food or water to seek guidance from the spirit world. Elaborate dances were performed not merely as pre-battle rallies, but as sacred ceremonies to invoke the power of animal spirits, the bear's strength, the eagle's sight, the wolf's cunning. Warrior societies like the dog soldiers of the Cheyenne or the Jaguar Knights of the Aztecs were not just military units, they were religious brotherhoods with their own rituals, songs, and duties to the community. A warrior's success was believed to depend as much on his spiritual purity and the favor of the spirits as on his skill with a weapon. This holistic view meant that a campaign was a collective spiritual endeavor for the entire community, with rituals performed by those at home to ensure the success and safe return of their fighters. The incredible diversity of these warrior traditions across the Americas stands as a powerful testament to human ingenuity. There was no single model, no universal blueprint for the ancient soldier. From the horse-mounted archer of the plains to the slinger in the mountains and the stealthy guerrilla fighter in the forests, each culture developed a way of war that was perfectly suited to its unique circumstances. This astonishing adaptability, born from a deep and sacred connection to their environment and their community, allowed these warriors to protect their ways of life against overwhelming odds for generations. Their legacy reminds us that the story of ancient warfare is not a single narrative of progression toward heavier armor and bigger armies, but a vast and rich tapestry of human adaptation, where the most effective warrior was often the one who best understood the world around him. The transformation from an ordinary child into a legendary warrior was never an accident. It was the result of a deliberate, grueling, and meticulously designed process that reshaped both body and mind. Across continents and cultures, these training regimens were far more than just military instruction. They were comprehensive systems aimed at forging a new kind of human being, one whose instincts, loyalty, and very identity were inextricably linked to the art of war. This journey often began not in adolescence, but at the very dawn of childhood, the most malleable time of life. In Sparta, the state's infamous Agoge system removed boys from their families at the tender age of 7, plunging them into a brutal world of calculated hardship. They were deliberately underfed to learn resourcefulness and stealth through theft, subjected to violent physical contests, and slept on rough reed beds they gathered themselves from the river. The goal was ruthless and singular: to systematically eliminate any trace of weakness, softness, or individual desire, replacing it with an unbreakable resilience and a primal loyalty to the group. Survival was the first and most important lesson, and it was taught through relentless, often cruel, experience. This focus on extreme physical conditioning was a universal theme, though the methods varied dramatically based on a culture's specific combat needs. The Roman legionaries' training was a masterpiece of pragmatic, repetitive drilling designed to build both immense strength and flawless muscle memory. Recruits practiced with a wooden gladius that was twice the weight of the real iron sword, making the actual weapon feel light and swift in battle. They marched for 20 miles in full kit, then were forced to build a fortified camp, a task that built not just endurance but also the practical engineering skills that made the Roman army self-sufficient on campaign. This constant repetition turned complex maneuvers into instinct. A soldier didn't need to think about forming a testudo shield wall or throwing his pilum. His body knew what to do, allowing him to function effectively even through the fog of fear and chaos that defined ancient combat. For the Mongol child on the steppes, physical training was simply life itself. Learning to ride and shoot a bow was as fundamental as learning to walk. They hunted from horseback, played games on horseback, and even slept in the saddle during migrations. This total immersion meant that by the time a boy became a man, the skills of a warrior were as natural to him as breathing, giving the Mongols an army where every individual was a supremely capable and mobile archer without the need for a formal training academy. Yet the most crucial transformation happened not in the muscles, but in the mind. Every great military culture understood that a warrior who could not control his fear was a liability, no matter how strong he was. Mental conditioning was therefore woven into the very fabric of daily training. Spartan youths were subjected to brutal whippings in front of altars, expected to endure the pain without a sound, a direct test of their mental fortitude. Roman recruits were drilled endlessly on complex battlefield formations and trumpet calls, requiring them to memorize and instantly respond to commands, forging a mind that could stay clear and focused under extreme pressure. For the samurai, mental training was deeply philosophical, rooted in Zen Buddhism and the complex ethical code of Bushido. They practiced meditation to achieve a state of mushin, or no mind, a calm clarity that allowed them to act without hesitation or fear of death in the midst of combat. This mental hardening was designed to overcome the most basic human instinct, self-preservation, and replace it with a steadfast commitment to the mission and the men beside them. Perhaps the most ingenious aspect of these ancient systems was their use of play and competition to foster the very bonds that would hold an army together in its darkest hour. Training was rarely a solitary affair. It was a communal ritual that strengthened the social fabric. The Romans held regular mock battles with blunted weapons, pitting cohorts against each other in fierce but controlled competitions that honed real combat skills while building unit pride and cohesion. Viking youth engaged in grueling sports like glima, a form of wrestling, and stone lifting, contests that built strength but also established a clear hierarchy of skill and courage within the group. These games taught men to trust one another, to understand each other's strengths and weaknesses, and to function as a single, cohesive unit. The message was clear: your survival depends on the man next to you, so you must know him, trust him, and be willing to sacrifice for him. This was the ultimate goal of all training: to forge individuals into an unbreakable collective, where the whole was infinitely greater than the sum of its parts. Every piece of gear an ancient warrior carried told a story far beyond its practical use. It was a direct reflection of his people's technological prowess, his place in society, and the very environment from which he came. Consider the stark contrast between the Greek hoplite and the Hun horse archer. The hoplite's entire existence on the battlefield was defined by his heavy bronze panoply and the massive concave aspis shield. This equipment was a physical manifestation of the Greek ideal of communal defense. The shield was deliberately large not just to protect its bearer, but to cover the unprotected right side of the man fighting next to him in the phalanx. His success relied on collective strength and holding the line. In complete opposition, the Hun warrior's effectiveness was born from a life in the saddle on the open steppe. His composite bow, a marvel of layered wood, sinew, and horn, could launch an arrow with devastating force from incredible distances. His lack of heavy armor was not a weakness but a calculated choice for supreme mobility, allowing him to swarm an enemy, unleash a hailstorm of arrows, and vanish before a slower, heavier force could ever engage. His gear was an extension of a nomadic lifestyle, prioritizing speed, range, and the ability to strike without being struck in return. This relationship between tool and environment was just one layer of a much deeper meaning. For many warriors, their arms and armor were deeply personal, often spiritual objects. The Japanese katana is the most famous example. Its creation was a sacred art, with master smiths performing purification rituals before forging the blade in a process that was as much a prayer as it was metallurgy. The resulting sword, with its graceful curve and impossibly sharp edge, was believed to hold the very soul of the samurai who wielded it. It was a family heirloom, a symbol of honor, and a lethal instrument all in one. Similarly, the Aztec Macuahuitl was a terrifyingly unique weapon. Without advanced metalworking for blades, Aztec craftsmen ingeniously embedded countless razor-sharp obsidian shards into a wooden club. In motion, it became a blur of cutting edges capable of inflicting horrific wounds, even decapitating horses according to Spanish accounts. But beyond its brutality, it was also a status symbol for elite Jaguar and Eagle warriors, its design reflecting a culture that mastered its available resources to fearsome effect. Perhaps no ancient military understood the logistical and tactical genius of standardized equipment better than the Romans. The legions were a machine, and every part was designed for efficiency and mass production. The legionary's gladius was a perfect example, a short, double-edged stabbing sword ideal for the tight confines of a shield wall, where slashing weapons would be useless. His pilum javelin was a work of psychological and tactical engineering. Its long iron shank was designed to bend upon impact with an enemy shield, rendering the shield impossibly cumbersome to hold and forcing the opponent to discard it. Even if it missed, the bent shank made it unusable by the enemy, effectively removing it from the battle. This standardization meant a soldier could be deployed anywhere in the vast empire, and his broken or lost gear could be quickly replaced from a central armory, ensuring the army remained a consistently effective force. The evolution of armor is a story of an ancient arms race, a constant dance between offense and defense. Early protection began with hardened leather and quilted fabrics, which then gave way to bronze. The Greek muscle cuirass was a masterpiece of metalworking, but it was incredibly expensive and restrictive. The Romans revolutionized personal protection with lorica segmentata, armor made from overlapping iron strips fastened with hooks and ties. It offered excellent protection for the vital organs while allowing far greater mobility than a solid breastplate, and was relatively easy to mass produce and repair. This evolution culminated in the Byzantine Cataphract, a warrior who was essentially a medieval tank. Both rider and horse were encased in lamellar armor, small plates of iron or leather laced together into a flexible yet incredibly protective shell. The cost to outfit such a warrior was astronomical, reflecting his high social status and his role as the decisive shock force on the battlefield. Ultimately, these tools were more than just inanimate objects. They were extensions of the warrior's will, his identity, and his life. A sword might be a family heirloom passed down through generations, its nicks and scars telling the story of battles long past. A beautifully decorated helmet or a shield bearing personal symbols could signify rank and achievements, a walking resume of a soldier's courage. In an age without factories, this equipment was incredibly valuable. A full set of hoplite armor represented a significant investment, defining a man as a citizen soldier with the wealth to defend his polis. To lose one's shield was the ultimate disgrace, not because of its monetary value, but because it meant abandoning your duty to the man beside you. Whether won in battle, inherited from a father, or issued by the state, a warrior's gear was intimately tied to his honor, his survival, and his story, making the study of these ancient tools a deeply human exploration of the past. What truly enabled a man to stand his ground when a wall of enemy spears was bearing down on him, when the air was thick with the screams of the dying and the metallic scent of blood? The psychology of the ancient warrior is a complex tapestry woven from threads of deep personal motivation, powerful group dynamics, and carefully crafted mental conditioning. It's a world far removed from our modern concepts of patriotism or ideology. For the vast majority of these soldiers, the decision to fight and risk a horrific death was driven by intensely personal and tangible incentives. A young Roman from a poor family might see his 25-year term in the legions not as a sentence, but as the only viable path to a plot of farmland and the coveted prize of Roman citizenship for his children. For a landless Germanic warrior, the promise of a share of plunder, perhaps a fine sword, a silver arm ring, or cattle, from a successful raid was a powerful lure, a chance to elevate his status and wealth within his tribe. Conversely, the fear of losing that status could be just as motivating. The dread of shame, of being branded a coward in front of your family and community, was a psychological burden many deemed heavier than the physical risk of battle. In Sparta, the punishment for cowardice was so severe that those who fled were condemned to a life of utter social exclusion, forced to wear patched cloaks and unkempt beards, and were often so shunned that suicide was seen as a preferable alternative. This potent cocktail of hope for reward and terror of disgrace was a primary engine driving men into the fray. Yet, before a single blow was struck, warriors across the globe engaged in intricate rituals designed to fortify their minds and bind them together as a single entity. These were not mere superstitions, they were crucial psychological tools. The Norse would invoke Odin and Tyr, chanting and beating their shields in a thunderous rhythm that slowly dissolved individual fear into a collective fury. Aztec priests would perform elaborate sacrifices to Huitzilopochtli, the sun god, assuring the soldiers that their cause was divinely favored and their deaths, if they came, would nourish the very cosmos. The Zulu impi would dance the Gia, a mesmerizing display of athleticism and synchronization that reinforced unit cohesion and showcased their strength to both themselves and their enemies. These shared experiences created an altered state of group consciousness, a powerful sense of esprit de corps that told each man he was part of something larger and more powerful than himself. It was a way to collectively tap into a well of courage that might have been inaccessible to any one person alone. The role of leadership in shaping this psychology cannot be overstated. A general was not just a strategist, he was a master of human motivation. Alexander the Great was a genius in this regard. He didn't command from the rear, he led the cavalry charge himself, sharing every hardship with his men, from thirst in the desert to wounds on the front line. This created an immense reservoir of personal loyalty. His soldiers believed in him so completely, they followed him to the very ends of the known world. The Romans, in contrast, perfected a system of institutionalized discipline designed to override individual instinct. The practice of decimation, selecting by lot, and executing 1 in 10 men from a unit that had shown cowardice was a brutally effective, if horrifying, way to ensure that the fear of one's own commanders was greater than the fear of the enemy. Yet they balanced this terror with a clear and predictable system of promotions, pay, and pensions, offering a glittering carrot to accompany the sharp stick. This combination of extreme punishment and tangible reward engineered a specific type of courage, not necessarily fearless, but too disciplined to break. Beneath the veneer of ritual and discipline, we find the most humanizing truth of all. These legendary fighters experienced the same primal emotions we would. Archaeologists have uncovered poignant letters from Roman forts like Vindolanda on Hadrian's Wall, where a soldier writes home asking for more socks and warm underwear, while another invites his friend to a birthday party. These brief, everyday messages remind us that these men were far from home, cold, lonely, and likely terrified of the barbarian tribes beyond the wall. Greek historians like Thucydides describe the palpable dread that would spread through a hoplite phalanx as they watched the approaching enemy line, the metallic clatter of armor mingling with the nervous prayers of each man. After battle, the psychological toll could be devastating. While ancient sources don't discuss post-traumatic stress disorder as we understand it, we see hints of it. The Greek playwright Aeschylus, who fought at Marathon, wrote powerful tragedies filled with themes of guilt, trauma, and the haunting furies that pursued those stained with bloodshed. It is not difficult to imagine a veteran of countless brutal siege assaults, whether Assyrian or Roman, being haunted by the echoes of those experiences for the rest of his life. Ultimately, the most powerful motivator in the heat of combat may have been the simplest and most profound: the man standing next to you. In the press of the Greek phalanx, your shield didn't just protect you, it protected your friend. To abandon your position was to directly expose him to death, a betrayal that would live with you forever if you survived. The Germanic comitatus bond was a sacred oath of mutual loyalty between a chieftain and his warriors, a personal commitment that was far stronger than any abstract duty to a state. This powerful group dynamic, the desire to earn the respect of your comrades and the utter impossibility of facing their shame, forged a courage that was about community and connection. It tells us that the ancient soldier's greatest strength was not his sword arm, but his human heart, beating in rhythm with the hearts of the brothers he fought alongside. For far too long, the grand narrative of ancient warfare has been a story told almost exclusively about men. But if we listen closely to the whispers in the archaeological record and read between the lines of often biased historical accounts, we hear another story. One where women were not merely passive spectators but active, essential participants in the theater of war. This isn't about rewriting history with a modern agenda. It's about finally acknowledging the full, complex picture that has always been there, waiting for us to see it. The evidence comes in many forms, from the legendary to the literal. The ancient Greeks spoke with a mixture of fear and fascination about the Amazons, a powerful society of female warriors from the distant East. While these stories were likely mythologized, they may have been inspired by real encounters with cultures where women held martial roles. This theory is stunningly supported by archaeology from the vast steppes of Scythia and Sarmatia. Here, burial mounds known as kurgans have been found containing the skeletons of women buried with the same honors as male warriors. Their bones rest alongside iron swords, quivers full of arrows, and even full sets of scale armor. Some of these women show clear signs of battle injuries, and analysis of their remains suggests a lifetime of horseback riding and archery. These weren't mythical figures, they were real women who lived, fought, and were laid to rest as the warriors they were. Beyond the nomadic tribes of the steppes, we find women stepping into the spotlight as brilliant military commanders and symbols of fierce resistance. Take Boudica, the queen of the Celtic Iceni tribe in Roman-era Britain. When the Romans betrayed her family, flogging her and assaulting her daughters, she didn't retreat in grief. She unified several tribes into a massive revolt, leading a terrifying army that burned the Roman settlements of Camulogenum, Londinium, and Verulamium to the ground. Ancient historians describe her riding into battle before her troops, tall and fierce, rallying her people against one of the greatest military powers in history. Across the Mediterranean, in the wealthy desert city of Palmyra, Queen Zenobia carved out her own empire in the 3rd century AD. Directly challenging Roman authority, she led her armies on campaign, conquering Egypt and much of Anatolia. She was a skilled tactician and a shrewd leader who personally directed the defense of her city against the legions of Emperor Aurelian. These women were not anomalies. They were powerful rulers who personally commanded respect and led from the front, proving that strategic genius and the will to fight were not confined by gender. The contributions of women extended far beyond the battlefield itself, forming the indispensable backbone that made sustained warfare possible. In any ancient army, the fighters were only the tip of the spear. Behind them was a vast support network, and it was often managed and staffed by women. They were the healers, using knowledge of herbs and medicine to treat wounds and diseases that could cripple an army faster than any enemy. They managed the sprawling camp followers train, organizing the supplies, cooking the meals, and maintaining morale during long, arduous campaigns. During sieges, the line between supporter and combatant blurred completely. When a city's walls were breached, every able-bodied person became a defender. Women are documented throughout history fighting alongside men on the ramparts, dropping stones and pouring boiling oil on attackers to protect their homes and children. Their involvement was a necessity born of total war. Even in societies where women were not expected to wield weapons, their role was profoundly strategic. In Sparta, famously, the men were consumed by military training from childhood. This created a unique social vacuum that Spartan women filled with remarkable authority. While the men lived in barracks, the women managed the family estates, controlled finances, and oversaw the large populations of helot laborers. This economic power gave them influence and a level of independence that shocked other Greeks. Aristotle himself complained that Spartan women held too much sway. They were also responsible for raising the next generation of warriors, instilling in their sons the values of courage and sacrifice for the state. Their influence was so pivotal that a Spartan mother was famously quoted as telling her son to return from battle, either carrying his shield victorious or being carried dead upon it. This wasn't a dismissal of her son's life, but a powerful articulation of the cultural values she was charged with upholding, where honor and the collective good were paramount above all else. From the poet who composed epic verses celebrating heroic deeds to the priestess who performed rituals to ensure divine favor before a battle, women shaped the cultural and spiritual landscape of war. They were the keepers of the stories that defined a warrior's purpose and the rituals that prepared him for his fate. By acknowledging this multifaceted role, we do more than just add a few names to a historical list. We fundamentally expand our understanding of ancient warfare. It was not a monolithic endeavor conducted by faceless legions of men, but a complex human enterprise that involved entire communities. Recognizing the diverse contributions of women, from the steppe archer to the Celtic queen to the Spartan estate manager, enriches our appreciation for the warriors behind the legends, revealing a far more intricate and fascinating tapestry of the ancient world. The legacy of these ancient fighters is not confined to dusty history books or the crumbling ruins of forgotten battlefields. It is woven into the very fabric of our modern world, shaping everything from how nations organize their defenses to the core values we hold dear. Consider the enduring blueprint of the Roman legion, their model of a professional, salaried standing army with its clear chain of command, standardized equipment, and regimental structure became the foundational template for virtually every European military power that followed. The concept of a soldier as a state employee, rather than a feudal vassal or a seasonal militiaman, is a direct inheritance from Rome. This system of discipline, logistics, and engineering allowed them to build and maintain an empire, and when that empire fell, the ghost of its military organization haunted the armies of kings and emperors for centuries, eventually evolving into the complex armed forces we know today. Beyond mere structure, the philosophical echoes of ancient warrior codes continue to resonate in our concepts of honor, duty, and leadership. The Japanese samurai's Bushido, while often romanticized, codified a set of virtues: loyalty, courage, honesty, and self-discipline that profoundly influenced the modern Japanese national character, from the conduct of business executives to the meticulous dedication of craftsmen. In the West, the Greek hoplite's identity as a citizen soldier who fought to protect his own political rights and property established a powerful link between military service and civic responsibility that became a cornerstone of Republican thought, eventually finding its expression in the ideals of democratic nations where the citizenry is also the ultimate defender of the state. These ancient ideals challenge us to consider what we truly value: blind obedience or thoughtful duty, personal glory or collective good. The strategic minds of these long-gone generals still inform military academies around the globe. The tactical genius of Alexander the Great and his father Philip, particularly their masterful use of combined arms wedding the unstoppable hammer of the Companion Cavalry to the unyielding anvil of the Macedonian Phalanx, is still studied as a textbook example of how to leverage different units in perfect synchronization to achieve a decisive victory. Even more strikingly, the warfare of the Mongol Empire prefigured modern military doctrine in uncanny ways. Their use of swift, highly mobile units, their relentless focus on intelligence gathering through extensive scouting networks, and their sophisticated system of communication via the YAM messenger routes all mirror the principles of speed, information, and coordination that define 20th century blitzkrieg tactics and 21st century network-centric warfare. They understood that winning a war was as much about outthinking and outmoving an enemy as it was about outfighting them. Perhaps their most profound and lasting impact, however, was as the world's first and most effective engines of globalization. Warriors were unknowing agents of cultural exchange on a massive scale. As Alexander's armies marched from Greece to India, they didn't just conquer, they built cities, intermarried with local populations, and spread Hellenistic art, architecture, and ideas, creating a fused Greco-Buddhist culture whose influence can be traced all the way to the statues of the Buddha himself. The Roman legions, stationed at the farthest edges of the empire from the misty highlands of Scotland to the deserts of Syria, brought with them Roman law, Latin language, and engineering marvels like aqueducts and roads, permanently altering the cultural and physical landscape of 3 continents. The Vikings, through their raids, trade, and settlement, connected the frozen north to the bustling markets of Constantinople and the caliphates of Baghdad, exchanging not just goods but stories, technologies, and genetic lineages that shaped the development of medieval Europe. This enduring fascination with their stories, from the historical to the heavily mythologized, speaks to something deep within the human spirit. Our bookshelves are filled with novels about the legions, our cinemas are dominated by films about Spartans and samurai, and our games allow us to command these legendary troops ourselves. We are drawn to these narratives not for the bloodshed itself, but for what they represent, the ultimate test of character. They explore the timeless themes of courage in the face of overwhelming fear, sacrifice for a cause greater than oneself, and the heavy burdens of leadership. By peeling back the layers of legend to find the real people underneath the Roman soldier writing home for socks, the Spartan farmer tending his plot, the Mongol rider missing the open steppe, we gain a far richer understanding. We see not just their capacity for violence, but their incredible capacity for endurance, loyalty, and innovation. Their legacy is a mirror held up to humanity itself, reflecting our darkest impulses and our most noble aspirations, reminding us that the choices of individuals, however lost to time, truly can echo for millennia. From the disciplined ranks of Roman legions to the nomadic horse archers of the steppes, the true stories of ancient soldiers reveal a rich tapestry of human experience that goes far beyond the legends. We've seen how these warriors balanced individual bravery with collective duty, how their cultures shaped their methods and motivations, and how they adapted to challenges with innovation and resilience. Their lives were not just about combat, they were farmers, artists, leaders, and thinkers who left a lasting impact on the world we inhabit today. I hope this exploration has given you a new appreciation for the real people behind the myths, their struggles, their triumphs, and their humanity. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history's warriors, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more content on historical mysteries, and share your thoughts in the comments. Which ancient warrior culture fascinates you the most? Thank you for watching, and remember, history is not just about what happened, but about